Hi everyone, I'm Zach Reinhardt, here to do my year-end review. Time to start on all that stuff. Today we're doing the top 10 Japanese EPs of 2016. Albums will come out next week, but for now, let's sit with some of the shorter releases that came out this past year. Starting off at number 10 is the new EP from Remigai and the Nakamura High School Brass Band, Giant. Remigai is a three-piece pop group that makes some kind of eclectic, a little off-the-wall pop, kind of in the same vein of like Shugo Tokumaru. And this is the second time that they've paired up with the Nakamura High School Brass Band for a short EP. This thing's 5 tracks, and it's actually one of the longer releases on this list. And this EP is basically Remigai doing what Remigai does best, but with also a full brass band behind them that only improves it. These songs are all really solid, they're well written, there's lots of cool melody work on here, and they use the brass to pretty good effect. My only real complaint with this thing is that there isn't more of the brass in kind of the foreground. The brass often plays a kind of background atmospheric role, but when they do come in and take like a lead melody, it sounds great. And like these songs just kind of get stuck in your head. Like they're just really catchy and fun Remigai pop tracks with a bigger scope. And it comes out just really solid. Nothing pushing the envelope, nothing really experimental or incredible about it, but just done really well. Then moving on to number 9, we have Dayglow with Don't Know Where It Is. Dayglow has been kicking around for a few years, and they're finally, like, this is their first commercial EP. They've had some releases in the past, like they had a little EP on their Bandcamp, and they always put out songs occasionally on their SoundCloud, but this is their first like commercial purchasable EP. You can buy it on a CD, which is what I did. Dayglow makes kind of poppy garage rock and pop punk with the kind of indie pop sheen over top of it. Their music is upbeat, well written, and well performed. There's some really great just guitar work all over this thing. And if you're familiar with the band Waikiki Beat, that was really big last year, or last year, I mean 2015. I guess we're in 2017 now. Happy New Year. But if you're into Waikiki Beat, some of the same members are in this band. I know at least the front man, but I think there might have been like a shared guitarist as well. I'm not entirely certain, but there's definitely a lot of similarities between those bands, but think a little more Strokes and a little less Killers. The only reason this thing isn't higher on the list is it starts to drag on a little bit towards the end. It's 6 tracks, and it's fairly long for an EP, and like tracks like 4 and 5 just don't really get my blood pumping quite as much as the rest of the album does. But they're not bad tracks, and the rest of the EP really makes up for it with some just really on point, sharply written tunes. Then, coming in at number 8, we have Kujaku with Keiren. Kujaku was a band that I saw a lot of other bands that I like Loop Rider, for example, talking about on Twitter and such. And I checked them out, and they make kind of long, like groove-based kind of post-punk tracks and post-rock. Think along the lines of like Swans. Their songs are heavy and brooding and slow and kind of hypnotic. They're definitely kind of dark and depressive is the kind of just overall mood of the album. And this thing is only 2 tracks, but they're both pretty long. And while I don't think they're really pushing the envelope and creating something truly incredible on here, this is definitely a very solid entry into that kind of dark, slow, post-punk subgenre. If you're looking for something to really kind of get wrapped up in and just kind of hypnotized by, Kujaku has some really solid, slow, long form tracks on here. Then at number 7, we have Tropical Death with Thunder Island. Possibly this year's contender for best album art, but just as good as the album art is the music. Tropical Death is the Japanese underground supergroup I've always dreamt of, with an ex-member of the Mornings and 2 members from Loop Rider. This thing had some pretty high expectations to meet, and I'm happy to say this thing doesn't disappoint. Tropical Death does a kind of more accessible version of some kind of discordant math rock and post-punk, but without the kind of candy coating that other bands who try to clean up this sound get. Bands like Tricot, for example. This EP has a pretty clear goal, and it hits that goal perfectly. My only problem is it doesn't really exceed my kind of hopes and expectations much. It's just a really solid, like kind of perfectly executed version of what they were going for, but it's nothing really boundary pushing or mind blowing. But if you're looking for something to just get your blood pumping and to just rock out to, you can't go wrong with this new Tropical Death EP. This is some of my favorite musicians in Japan, just putting out some really solid music. And coming in at number 6, we have Ninja Government with Tobago in Mame? I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, but I stopped worrying about that as soon as I put it on. This thing is a noise record. It's loud, it's abrasive, it's experimental, and it has aspects of like speedcore and hardcore techno, as well as like free jazz. But you often hear these kind of experimental, super avant-garde, weird genres like harsh noise and stuff. And you think, oh, it's like either really pretentious or it's like really dark and depressive. And somehow, Ninja Government is none of those. This is actually, despite being incredibly abrasive, loud, and just aggressive, this is one of the most just joyous and silly and over-the-top fun records I've heard all year. This band is a 3-piece comprised of trumpet, guitar, and electronics, and they make really great use of it all. There's moments of just loud, pounding, like techno kick drums, and there's like these weird, abrasive, echoey trumpet solos and all this guitar noise. It uses a bunch of like weird samples and like manipulated vocal stuff, and it somehow comes together as being just one of the most silly and fun and just over the top, kind of tongue-in-cheek records I've heard all year. I listened to tracks like High Speed Wife, and like, how can you not get a smile on your face from that track? It's so fucking stupid and silly. This EP is a complete clusterfuck of nonsense, but a massively entertaining one. If you can handle like harsh noise and like loud abrasive stuff, you definitely, like, I highly recommend this thing. It is one of a kind. I'm really glad I just stumbled upon it randomly while browsing through Bandcamp one day. And we're at the halfway point, people. It's number 5, Nakigal Twin Tails, Ichijiku. This is the first non-full album that I did a full review of, and I did that because I had just a ton of thoughts, and my review ended up being longer than the whole album itself. And I'm sure I talked about individual tracks longer than the track length. But this is a really just one-of-a-kind kind of interesting record. Nakigal Twin Tail explores everything from jazz and metal to progressive rock and even like some folk and country a little bit, all within a kind of Japanese underground, like art punk framework. There's lots of really cool melodic stuff on here and like strange rhythmic things. They really like to kind of subvert your expectations, whether that's kind of shifting where the downbeat is on a song like Kingyo, or just throwing in kind of random craziness like you get on Orimono. This band makes some really like boundary pushing kind of crazy music, but sadly isn't super consistent with it. There are a few songs on here that I find just a little underwhelming in comparison with like the best songs on here. And that's why I think Nakigao Twin Tail is a real diamond in the rough. This is their first release, and it's very good, and it has some really just like cool stuff that I haven't heard before. But I feel like they just need another year or two or more to kind of cut from that kind of rough diamond into that like flawless gem that I know they can be. Come 2018, 2019, if things work out perfectly, maybe Nakigao Twin Tail's still together and they're putting out some of the most boundary pushing and forward thinking music in Japan. But until then, they have a really solid, interesting little EP here, or mini album, that has some songs that are like so kind of interesting that they're worth almost like dissecting. But moving on to number 4, we have a little bit of a weird entry here because this didn't actually come out in 2016. It came out right at the end of 2015. So, you know, it's basically a 2016 record. Like, that's when I was experiencing it. But it technically come out in 2015. But I'm putting it on here because it's great. It's the new single from Hearsays called Middle of Moving. I actually have it right here on vinyl. What do you know? But this thing is like a pretty like near perfect example of what indie pop can be. This is only 2 tracks, and they're actually a little bit on the longer side, but they really don't waste any time. These songs are packed with interesting guitar work and well-written melodies. There's lots of catchy choruses on here. And like Hearsays, I think might have been my favorite indie pop band already, but after this thing came out, they like were firmly cemented in that place. They have a sound similar to the Homecomings, but I think they just have better melody work and just more tightly, sharply written songs. They have kind of sliding, jangly guitars and female vocals and just some really well-written, tight pop songs with a lot of focus on guitar. And it's just like, this is kind of the peak of indie pop for me so far. And it's just been one of those really enjoyable releases that I just come down to my little turntable here and put it on and just get lost in it for like 8-9 minutes or so. But now we're getting really tight here. The competition is fierce with number 3 going to Oh Summer Vacation's new EP, 7 Minutes Order. Sadly, the future of Oh Summer Vacation looks a bit uncertain as some of the members have left and the remaining member is unsure what the future is going to look like. But no matter what happens, we can still revel in the wonderful EP that they put out earlier in 2016. These guys are a Kansai punk band in the long tradition of Kansai punk bands, and they really do their kind of family tree justice. There's a lot of experimentation on here. There's just tons of shifting sound, and like the songwriting is really dense and it's constantly moving. These guys are also one of the better bands that's doing like the really kind of yelpy, high-pitched female vocals. This thing is brutal, loud, distorted, and in your face, but it's also well written It's diverse, it can be delicate at times, and it has some really great melody work. The only real flaw this thing has is that the production is a bit too lo-fi for my tastes and gets a bit brittle at times when it's not supposed to be. I mean, at times it's supposed to be kind of brittle and abrasive. But in the more melody focused, kind of slower bits, I feel that the production takes away from things a little bit and just makes it a little more muddy. But performance wise and songwriting wise and just energy wise, this thing is on point all the way through. It's just something that makes you want to just thrash about. It gets in your muscles and like you can't stand still anymore while you're listening to this thing. You have to at least kind of headbang to it. And coming in at number 2 is Otoboke Beaver with Bakuro Book. Choosing between Otoboke Beaver and O Summer Vacation was probably the hardest choice in making this list. They're really like both incredibly good punk records, both from Kansai still, both from Kyoto actually. And really it's the production that puts Otoboke Beaver ahead here for me. This EP is just perfect. Like, there's nothing to change about it. There's nothing to complain about at all. These songs are well written, they're fast paced, they're full of energy, and they're not aggressive despite being loud and in your face. They're just kind of excited and bubbly and fun. From the very moment that first song starts and they just start screaming Bakuro Book at me, I just get a smile on my face, and I can't help but just want to mosh to this. Otoboke Beaver also put out a full-length album earlier this year, but I really think Bakuro Book is the superior release and really just shows what Otoboke Beaver does best, which is to say fast pace, fun, catchy punk music. This thing is just stellar. There's nothing else to really say about it. Like, punk isn't dead. It just moved to Kansai, and it's been living there for quite a few years now. But even with all that praise, I'm afraid there's really nothing on this list that comes even close to how great Mechanophone's U-Holic EP was. So you know how I mentioned that Nakigao Twin Tail in a few years could be putting out some of the most forward-thinking music in Japan? Mechanophone is that band right now. U-Holic is 4 tracks that are really something I've never heard before. Something like truly unique and incredible. Mechanophone combines the elements of modern, contemporary, like Japanese art punk with progressive rock along the lines of Yes and King Crimson, while also making distinct references to their kind of lineage that paved the way for them, bands like Number Girl, for instance. And they combine all of these various influences into something that is utterly unique and uniquely Japanese and uniquely Mechanophone. This record could have come from no other place and no other time. All of these tracks are really just utterly unique and incredible in their own way. Mechanophone uses so much interesting, like, intricate songwriting stuff and, like, rhythmic elements that are just kind of strange and shifting and odd kind of sound palette choices, that this EP is, like, really cerebral and something you can really, like, sink your kind of mental teeth into and dissect, while also having so much kind of raw energy and charisma that it simultaneously operates on such an instinctive level that you almost don't need to put any thought into it to enjoy it at all. In every point, Mechanophone meets and exceeds any possible expectation you could possibly have for them. My only complaint is that it isn't longer. And this EP, like, makes me just so excited about this band and about what their future could be, that I think not only that Mechanophone is one of the best bands of 2016. But if they put out some more stuff and they have a really solid full-length release, especially, I might be looking back on Mechanophone as one of the best bands of the decade. It's really something incredible and never before heard. There's not a single band on this planet that sounds like Mechanophone. And that's the list. There you have it. Some really great EPs to listen to while you wait for my top albums video that's coming out next week. I'm really looking forward to that. That should be a lot of fun. This was a ton of fun to put together, just listening to all the best music that came out this year. And yeah, so I will see you guys next week. Happy New Year. Hope you guys all enjoyed the holidays. Peace.